Imagine boarding a plane for what should have been a routine 45-minute flight. You buckle your seatbelt, smile at the flight attendant, and settle in. Outside, the engines roar as the aircraft climbs higher and higher. 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 34,000 feet. Then something invisible enters the cabin. No explosion, no fire, no warning that passengers can understand. People begin feeling unusually sleepy. A child rests against their mother's shoulder. Someone yawns. Another passenger closes their eyes. The pilots, sitting just a few meters away in the cockpit, are also becoming tired. They don't realize that every second, the oxygen keeping them alive is disappearing. Within minutes, everyone on board slowly loses consciousness. The aircraft continues flying, perfectly, for almost 2 hours, until it becomes known as one of aviation's most terrifying ghost planes. This is the true story of Helios Airways Flight 522, where one tiny mistake at 34,000 feet led to the deaths of all 121 people on board. And the most terrifying part, most of them never even realized they were dying. August 14th, 2005, Larnaca International Airport, Cyprus. Families carrying luggage filled the departure hall. Tourists were returning home after their summer vacations. Children laughed while waiting to board. Business travelers checked their watches. No one had the slightest idea this ordinary morning would soon become international news. The aircraft waiting outside was a Boeing 737-300 operated by Helios Airways. It had safely completed thousands of flights. There was no storm, no terrorist threat, no mechanical emergency visible to anyone. Everything looked completely normal. The flight was scheduled to travel from Larnaca to Prague with a stop in Athens. A total of 121 people boarded. 115 passengers, 6 crew members. The captain had thousands of flight hours. The first officer was experienced. The cabin crew welcomed everyone with smiles. At exactly 9:07 in the morning, Flight 522 pushed back from the gate. No one knew this would be the last journey of everyone on board. The night before the flight, engineers had performed routine maintenance on the aircraft. One system needed testing. The cabin pressurization control was switched from auto to manual. Normally, after maintenance, technicians return the switch to auto. But this time, it wasn't. A tiny switch, smaller than a human hand, left in the wrong position. It looked harmless. No alarms, no flashing red lights. Yet this small oversight would soon become deadly. As the aircraft climbed higher, the cabin should have automatically remained pressurized. Instead, the pressure inside slowly began dropping. At first, nobody noticed, because hypoxia doesn't feel painful. It tricks your brain. You simply begin feeling sleepy. At 34,000 feet, the outside air contains far too little oxygen for humans to survive. That's why aircraft cabins are pressurized. Without pressurization, every breath contains less usable oxygen. The brain is always the first organ to suffer. People become confused. They make poor decisions. Simple tasks suddenly become impossible. Many victims don't even realize anything is wrong. Instead, they experience a strange sense of calm. This deadly condition is called hypoxia. It is one of aviation's most dangerous silent killers. Inside Flight 522, passengers were unknowingly breathing thinner and thinner air. Some rubbed their eyes, some leaned back in their seats, others simply fell asleep, forever. Meanwhile, the pilots were experiencing exactly the same symptoms, and they didn't fully understand what was happening. To them, warning alarms sounded similar to another common aircraft alert. As precious seconds slipped away, their ability to think clearly disappeared. The airplane continued climbing, the oxygen continued disappearing, and time was running out. As Flight 522 leveled off at 34,000 feet, the situation inside the cockpit became critical. The captain and first officer were still trying to understand the strange warning horn echoing through the flight deck. Unknown to them, the real emergency wasn't a faulty alarm. It was the invisible lack of oxygen. Every breath they took contained less oxygen than their brains needed to function. Hypoxia doesn't strike like a heart attack. It quietly steals your ability to think. Your judgment fades, your reactions slow. Simple decisions become almost impossible. Within minutes, the pilots began showing the classic symptoms: confusion, poor communication, and delayed responses. Air traffic controllers called the aircraft. Helios 522, Athens control. Silence. Controllers assumed the crew might be busy, but inside the cockpit, something far more frightening was happening. The pilots were no longer capable of responding. One by one, they lost consciousness. Yet the airplane kept flying. The autopilot was still engaged, faithfully following the programmed route. Now, there was no one truly flying the aircraft. Flight 522 had become a ghost plane. Behind the cockpit door, the passenger cabin had grown eerily quiet. Just an hour earlier, flight attendants had been serving drinks and greeting passengers with warm smiles. Now, the aisles were empty. Meal carts stood where they had been left. Plastic cups rested on tray tables. Many passengers sat motionless in their seats, their heads gently tilted against the windows or seat backs. There was no panic, no screams, no desperate rush toward the exits. The aircraft continued cruising high above Greece, carrying 121 people who could no longer help themselves. On radar screens, however, everything looked normal. The Boeing 737 maintained its altitude. Its speed was steady. It stayed precisely on course. From the ground, it appeared to be a perfectly healthy flight. Only one thing was missing: the voices of the people inside. As the minutes turned into nearly an hour, air traffic controllers became increasingly concerned. Repeated radio calls went unanswered. Controllers attempted different frequencies. Nothing. They contacted nearby aircraft and asked them to relay messages. Still, nothing. The airplane continued toward Athens exactly as programmed. By now, officials realized this was no ordinary radio failure. The aircraft had effectively disappeared, without ever leaving the radar. Greek authorities made a decision that would reveal one of the most haunting scenes in aviation history. Military fighter jets were ordered to intercept the mysterious Boeing 737. The mission was simple: find out why a passenger aircraft was flying in complete silence. The fighter pilots accelerated toward the target, unaware that what they were about to witness would stay with them forever. As the fighter jets pulled alongside Flight 522, the pilots looked through the cockpit windows. What they saw was chilling. The captain appeared slumped over his controls. The first officer showed no signs of movement. Neither pilot responded to visual signals from the fighter aircraft. The passenger windows revealed almost no movement inside the cabin. The airplane wasn't damaged. Its engines were still running smoothly, but inside, it was almost completely silent. A modern airliner carrying 121 souls had become a ghost ship in the sky. Yet, just when it seemed there was no hope left, a single figure would suddenly appear inside the cockpit. And what happened next became one of the most remarkable and heartbreaking moments in aviation history. A man wearing an oxygen mask entered through the cockpit door. He wasn't one of the pilots. He was flight attendant Andreas Prodromou, who had received flight training and held a private pilot's license. Unlike everyone else, he had managed to survive longer by using a portable oxygen bottle. Somehow, he made his way through the unconscious cabin, forced open the reinforced cockpit door using the emergency access procedure, and took the captain's seat. The fighter pilots watched closely. They could see him trying desperately to understand the cockpit. The captain and first officer remained unconscious beside him. Andreas looked at the instruments, reached for the controls, and searched for a way to save everyone still on board. But time had almost run out. The aircraft had been flying for nearly 3 hours. Its fuel tanks were almost empty. The autopilot had done exactly what it was programmed to do: follow the flight plan until there was no fuel left. Then, the first engine suddenly flamed out. The silence inside the cabin was broken only by warning alarms. Without fuel, the aircraft began slowing. The autopilot disconnected. For the first time since the pilots lost consciousness, the airplane was no longer flying itself. Andreas gripped the controls. He attempted to steer the aircraft, searched for the radio, tried to communicate. The fighter pilots saw him wave. It was a heartbreaking moment. He knew the aircraft was in trouble, but he was alone. The second engine soon failed as well. Now the Boeing 737 had become a powerless glider. More than 30 tons of aircraft were descending toward the mountains north of Athens. Every second, the ground came closer. At approximately 12:04 p.m., Flight 522 descended uncontrollably toward the hills near the village of Grammatico. The aircraft struck the hillside at high speed. The impact was catastrophic. The Boeing 737 was destroyed instantly. All 121 people on board lost their lives. Rescue teams rushed to the crash site, but there were no survivors. Across Cyprus, Greece, and several other countries, families waited for news that would never bring hope. A routine summer flight had ended in one of aviation's most tragic accidents. The cause was an invisible lack of oxygen and one tiny switch left in the wrong position. Investigators recovered the aircraft's flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder. At first, many suspected a mysterious mechanical failure. But as investigators carefully examined the evidence, a shocking picture emerged. The cockpit warning horn that sounded after takeoff wasn't warning about takeoff configuration. It was warning that the cabin was not pressurizing. The pressurization control switch had been left in manual after maintenance, instead of being returned to auto. As the aircraft climbed higher, the cabin pressure slowly dropped. The crew became hypoxic. Confused by the warning and deprived of oxygen, they never corrected the problem. In aviation, accidents are rarely caused by one mistake alone. But on Flight 522, one small human error, combined with confusion and the silent effects of hypoxia, proved fatal.
If you like such content, don't forget to like, share with all your friends and subscribe to my channel for more interesting videos.